This is one of the most popular questions I get, especially from beginning musicians and people just getting started into music production. How do you start on a song? Initially, you're sitting down, you're in the studio, you have that blank slate of Ableton or Logic or whatever DAW you're using. How do you get started on a song? I know you're not going to like this answer, but honestly, it depends. From every song to every collaboration, pretty much any track period, not only for me, but pretty much for any other artist, it always depends. And I know, there's nothing more annoying than a vague YouTube video. So I actually want to give you some concrete ideas, or basically one idea of the best way to get started on a song. Because especially if it's your first song or your 100th, one of the biggest things is really kind of creating that spark. So I'm going to give you two main ways to really get started on a song. One, make sure you produce every day. Now, I know this is kind of a weird point because you're like, wait, but I want to know how you get started on a song. But here's the truth. A lot of people think that when it comes to creative individuals, whether you are a writer or a musician or whatever, that you just wait. You wait, and then passively by waiting, that spark comes up, that motivation appears, then you start working. The truth is, for almost every creative individual out there, what you do is you work every day. Now, sometimes you're on the game, sometimes you're not. But by having the habit of working every day, it is easier when you get to that song starting process to kind of get those creative juices flowing. One of my favorite quotes is from Neil Strauss, I think he's like 9 or 10 New York Times bestselling author. His goal is every day he has to write 2 bad pages of material. Now, sometimes those 2 bad pages are horrible. He writes 2 of them. He's like, you know what? Today's not my day, but at least I did the minimum quota. However, on the other days, like say he's like, look, if I'm really on top of it, then boom, I can just write those 2 pages, make them be really good pages, and then I keep writing. Likewise with music, a good thing I suggest is maybe set a minimum thing of, I'm going to produce for an hour to 2 every day. That way when you do sit down, let's say you are working on a new song, it is still forcing yourself every single time to at least begin that process. Because I think too many musicians, when it comes to starting a song, just sit back, again, they look at that blank slate and they're like, all right, I'm just going to wait. Something's going to come to me, or maybe you don't produce for days or even weeks, and you're like, I'm just going to wait for an idea to pop in my head. But you have to create that environment and that circumstance in order for that idea to pop into your head, if that makes sense. Now, the second big tip I'm going to give you, and this is now more specific about starting the song, is to play around with pre-made presets and samples. This is what I do. And the reason why is, I think when you sit down on a blank slate, there are, like an infinite amount of ways you could start on a song. You could start working on sound design and make something weird. You could dig through samples. You're maybe working with a vocalist. You already have the vocal out. You could maybe start with a kick, a hi-hat, a snare. I mean, there's so many different ways you can start a song, and it can be very overwhelming, especially in the beginning. So one big thing I suggest, maybe pull up Serum, get a bunch of presets. You can get a bunch for free if you go on like YouTube. You can even download some through Splice, whatever, and play around with the presets. Something at some point, and this one always happens with me, will click, and you're like, wait, I actually really like this one sound. I'm going to explore maybe a melody with the sound, and then that's how the process begins. Same thing with Splice. I'll go onto Splice, play a bunch of samples, and it's almost this magic, light bulb moment where I'll hear a sample and I'll be like, okay, instantly an entire song, especially let's say at first listen, will pop into my head, and I'll be like, oh great, you know what? This is that sample. I'm going to use this sample. I'm going to build a song around it. And what's interesting is I find that half the time, whether it's a preset, a sample, or whatever, it ends up in the song. The other half the time, though, which is funny, is it never ends up in the song. Where, yeah, even though that sample or that preset sparked the idea to start working on a song, and then I start kind of getting that process flowing and going, even though it sparked the idea, it was just more of that first breadcrumb that led me to the final piece, and the final piece has really nothing to do with the sample. But remember, one thing I want to stress at the end of the day, and again, I know this is nothing more annoying than a vague YouTube video, which is why I want to give you some kind of concrete tips. But at the end of the day, every song starts differently. And I kind of want to finish off this video with that by saying, even though, although that's a bad answer, in a good way, look at it in an optimistic way that, look, you could start any song however you want. I've heard of artists who say, look, I start with a kick. That's all I do. I get one kick sample and I mess with that kick sample for hour or even hours until it forms something. Other artists say, look, I'm going to actually start with a blank slate of Serum. Work on some weird sound design. Once I create this crazy unique sound, especially say in bass music, for example, then I'm going to go more forward with that. Or other artists like myself might say, you know what? Samples or presets is where I start, so it's already kind of pre-made, so I don't have to kind of think about the full-on creation process. It's more of using that in a unique way to create that initial spark.